That Thanksgiving night, right at the dinner table under warm lights, and in front of both the family and the neighbors standing outside the glass door watching us, my daughter pointed her finger at my face. She said, as if peeling the mask off a coward, "The best gift you could ever give us is disappearing." No trembling, no blinking, nothing left of the little girl who once clung to my neck and cried when she was 6. Only raw contempt, cold as steel. My son-in-law lowered his head to avoid my eyes. The kids froze, and I, a father who paid the mortgage for 16 years, who pulled them out of a dozen crises, was treated like a useless extra in the very house I paid for, dollar by dollar, to keep it standing. And the story you're about to hear is how I turned that humiliation into the first time I ever saved myself. If you've ever been treated as small in your own family, thank you for staying with me to this moment. I truly value your presence. And if you want to keep walking with me through stories that aren't easy to hear, but real in every sense of the word, I'm grateful if you choose to follow this journey. I never thought I would miss the feeling of breathing in the dry cold of Boulder, Colorado, on a late November afternoon. But tonight, just opening the front door for a few seconds, I wished I could stand out there longer, long enough to forget that inside the house at 1783, Maple Ridge Drive, a storm colder than the wind was waiting for me. I've lived here 16 years. I bought this house on a construction engineer's salary before a back injury forced me into early retirement. I thought I understood everything life could throw in my face, but I was wrong. This Thanksgiving night was the first time I saw a lifetime of sacrifice, treated like a disposable sheet of paper. From the kitchen doorway, I looked out toward the dining room. The roasted turkey I'd woken up at 5 in the morning to prepare still sat beautifully in the center. The warm golden lights washed over the traditional dishes and made the room look cozy, but the cold in my daughter Claire's eyes poured over every bulb in the house. She sat at the head of the table, arms crossed, her face as cold as the marble countertop I paid to install last year. Ethan, her husband, kept his tired face buried over his plate of turkey, and my 2 grandkids, Lily and Noah, sat still as if this dinner were a test they weren't sure they could pass. I tried to keep the atmosphere light. "Noah, would you like a little more juice?" The boy didn't look at me, just shook his head. Claire glanced over. "He doesn't need any, Dad. We're fine." She called me Dad, but it sounded like she was talking to a stranger. I swallowed the tightness in my throat. In my jacket pocket, the cream-colored envelope with the $7,500 check was still there, like a reminder that I had prepared carefully for tonight. A month earlier, Claire had called me at 1 in the morning, sobbing that she couldn't manage the credit card debt after Ethan's restaurant collapsed. I didn't think twice. I just thought, my daughter needs me, that's all. I stepped out of the kitchen, took a deep breath, and placed the envelope in front of Claire. "I want to give you this," I said as gently as I could. Claire didn't bother to look up. She tore the adhesive open with a sharp, impatient motion and pulled out the check. Her hand trembled just a little, not with emotion, but with irritation. She looked at the amount for maybe 2 seconds before giving a short, razor-edged laugh. 7,500? That's it? Claire? I forced my voice to stay calm. You told me the debt was... I told you it was more than that. She slapped the check onto the table. I told you we were drowning, Dad. Drowning. The entire table went silent. Ethan still said nothing. Lily stared at me, confused, and Noah looked up with his mouth slightly open, unable to speak. 7,500 fixes nothing, Claire continued, her voice so sharp it felt like someone was slicing my skin with a thin blade. You always think you can just throw money at a problem and call it solved. I exhaled slowly. What I meant was, no, you don't understand. Claire stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floor, splitting the room in half. You have never understood. Not once. I looked at her, stunned into breathlessness. The little girl who used to hide behind me during thunderstorms was now looking at me, like I was the debt she could never pay off. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, trying to stay steady. Claire laughed, a hollow, empty sound with nothing left of the child I once carried on my shoulders. "I mean, you live in this fantasy where you're the hero, where giving us money gives you the right to step into everything in our lives." "Claire, I have nev." "Exactly. You've never admitted it." She stepped closer, her voice low and cutting. "You didn't buy this house for us because you cared. You did it so we'd always have to look up to see whether you approved." My mouth opened to argue, but through the window I saw Carol Jennings, our neighbor, hanging a wreath. She froze, staring right into the living room. She had heard everything. Shame crawled up my neck. "Claire, this isn't the time." "Not the time to tell the truth?" She smirked. "You always loved talking about proper behavior. But have you ever listened to what it's like for us? Living with you hovering over everything?" "What do you want me to do?" I asked, hearing my own voice shake. "What do you want most?" Claire stared at me for a long, quiet moment. Then she tilted her head, exhaustion and resentment mixing into a smile that wasn't a smile at all. "You really want to know?" I nodded, my throat dry. She spoke slowly, clear enough that even the neighbor outside took a step back. "We want you to disappear from our lives." The words didn't just echo in the room. They punched straight into my ribcage. The kids stared wide-eyed. Ethan opened his mouth as if to speak, but didn't dare. I heard a small gasp from Lily, the clatter of a knife hitting a plate, then a silence colder than the snow outside. I stood up slowly. My fingers trembled even though I clenched the chair to stay steady. "I need a little air," I whispered. No one called after me. No one asked if I was okay. I turned away and walked into the kitchen. The wooden floor creaked under my feet, once a warm sound, now the lid of a coffin. With every step, Claire's words echoed behind me, but they were fading. All I could hear was the pounding of my pulse and the heavy breaths of someone climbing out of something deep. I stepped into the kitchen, where the light from the dining room couldn't touch me anymore. I placed my hands on the edge of the sink. They shook more than I wanted to admit. I inhaled, then again. And in the darkness of that cold kitchen, I understood a truth I had avoided my entire life. When people grow used to receiving, they turn your kindness into their expectation. And once it becomes their expectation, they stop being grateful. They start demanding. Something inside me dropped, weightless, like a rope snapping. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need air. I needed freedom. Finally, I straightened up. My eyes weren't wet anymore. My hands still trembled, but my breath was different, deeper, steadier. This was the night Claire changed everything, but it would also be the night. I changed myself. I stepped into the kitchen and braced myself against the counter to stay upright. My back throbbed, but it didn't hurt nearly as much as what my daughter had just said in front of the entire family, and the neighbor standing outside the window. I was trying to breathe when the kitchen door swung open. Claire stormed in like a cold front ripping through the hallway. "Where are you going?" she snapped. "You're not done." "Claire, I just need a minute." "No, I need a minute. I need you to listen." She brushed past me, turned the faucet on so hard that water splashed across the countertop. She grabbed a sponge and started scrubbing a plate that was already clean, like her anger needed something to destroy. "You're exaggerating. You're letting emotions speak, not truth." Claire whipped around. "Yes, because for 39 years I've had to swallow my emotions to live under your shadow." I stayed silent. She continued, her voice lower now, but sharp as steel. "You control us with money. Always money. You pay the mortgage, you get a say. You fix the car, you get a say. You cover the credit card debt, you get a say. I have to ask permission, explain myself, be grateful. All the time. Claire, I help the family because you like the power." She shoved the plate down into the sink. a heavy final clatter. I grew up with a mother who was always stressed because of you. I remember everything, every argument, every night she cried. You think I didn't know? You were always busy, always at a job site, always leaving Mom alone with me. That one cut deeper than I expected. I was 7, Claire went on. At my first school ceremony, Mom stood in the courtyard, watching every other parent show up. And where were you? At a job site, she told me. Your father is busy, but I saw it. I saw the disappointment, and that disappointment followed her until she got sick. I shook my head. Your mother died of heart disease, Claire. The doctors, yeah, heart. Claire laughed bitterly. You think heart disease just appears? Who stressed her out? Who made her carry everything alone? Who made her exhausted from always having to explain you away? She stepped closer, so close I could feel her trembling breath, though her eyes were steady and sharp. You're not the victim, Dad. You were the cause. My heart tightened. Claire, you're rewriting history to fit your anger. No, I'm saying what I've been swallowing since I was a kid. I swallowed hard. Fine. Then say it. What do you want? Claire crossed her arms and leaned against the counter. No more yelling, no more shaking. She went straight for the truth I never saw coming. This house, I frowned. What about it? We want to sell it. The room froze. Sell it? Yes. Claire held my gaze without blinking. We want to sell the house, take the money, and move to Phoenix. Start over. But you, she pointed directly at me, are the only obstacle. Obstacle? I repeated. The house is in your name, Claire said flatly. You know we can't sell it while you're alive, and you would never sign it over to me. The idea alone hurts you, doesn't it? My legs felt hollow. Claire, you know exactly why I kept the deed in my name. Oh, I do, she nodded with a cold smile. So we could never get away. No. Claire, when I bought this house, you and Ethan were 3 months late on rent. You cried and told me you had nowhere to go. Ethan was... Stop. Claire raised a hand sharply. Don't drag Ethan into this. Ethan failed 4 businesses, Claire. So what? Her voice hissed, her hand clutching the wet sponge until water dripped from her fist. Who asked you to help? You swooped in and then used it to keep us tied to you. No. I helped because you're family. Family? She laughed, this time not with anger, but with bitterness that had been aging for decades. Ethan stepped toward the doorway, but Claire held an arm out to stop him without even looking. A real family doesn't use money as a leash, she said, eyes locked on mine. A real family doesn't make people feel indebted. A real family doesn't force people to live in a house where every brick is a reminder that Dad paid for this. I gripped the counter to steady myself. Claire, do you hear what you're saying? Perfectly. Her voice shifted into something calm. Too calm. You don't understand. You never will. You think we need you. We only need freedom. And the truth is, she delivered the next word slowly, carefully, as if she wanted to make sure I absorbed every syllable. When you die, we can finally sell this house. My heart stopped for a beat. Claire continued, unwavering. So yes, Dad, you are the obstacle. The longer you live, the longer we're stuck. I looked at my daughter, and for the first time in my 62 years of living, I understood something I had never allowed myself to consider. They didn't want me to disappear just to feel lighter. I could see it in Claire's eyes. The emotional theatrics were only the surface. The real motive sat deeper. They needed me gone so they could be free. I couldn't sleep after closing Mary's album. My mind felt like an overworked air compressor, loud, overheated, ready to explode. One question kept looping. If Claire and Ethan really wanted to sell the house, were they even able to? I got up and turned on the light in the small office off the hallway. The room was coated in a thin layer of dust, like my life itself. Used, forgotten, shelved. In the corner of the old steel cabinet sat a yellow folder with frayed edges. I yanked the drawer open, the metal screeching cold and sharp. Inside were financial papers from 2008, the year Mary died, The year I bought this house to shield Claire for the first time. I sat down, opened the folder. The smell of old paper rose, familiar as memory. The purchase contract dated May 14th, 2008, stated clearly that the buyer was Michael Andrew Harlow, and that 100% ownership belonged to me. No co-owner, no joint signature, not under joint tenancy, not under community property. No one is anywhere on it except me. Claire's name only appeared in a small note at the bottom. Permitted occupant, Claire Harlow. Plus minor dependents. I rubbed my eyes. Back then, Claire had just lost her mother, was pregnant with Lily, and Ethan was unemployed. I signed without thinking. I just wanted my daughter to have a place to stay upright so she wouldn't collapse the way I nearly did. But now that tiny line had become the strongest legal wall I'd ever had. I flipped through the rest. Property taxes, home insurance, bank statements, all of them leading to one clear conclusion. The house belonged entirely to me. Claire didn't own even the smallest fraction. She had no authority to sell, mortgage, or dispose of anything. My heart beat faster, not from joy, but from realizing the truth they never considered. The thing they wanted to claim had never belonged to them. I turned another page. A small stack fell out. Lily's school files from 2015 and 2017. My address was listed as their residence, meaning Claire used my house to qualify for the school district. I remembered her saying, "Just for paperwork, Dad, the school makes it easier." I trusted her. I signed. Another page, Ethan's 2019 tax filing, where the IRS required verification for homeowner deductions. Beneath it was my own signature, signed to cover for him because he used my address to get lower taxes. I exhaled. I had covered for them more than they realized, and probably more than they deserved. Each document hit like a slap. Claire claimed I controlled them with money? No. The truth was I saved them from their own mistakes, let them live in a house without paying taxes, let them use this address for benefits they weren't eligible for, and prevented them from being flagged for minor legal issues. And in return, they ended up seeing me as the obstacle in their way. I sat there for a long moment. Then I picked up my phone, opened my contacts, and scrolled to the letter D. Daniel Brooks, an old friend from the construction company, now the best real estate attorney I knew. I called. 3 rings. Daniel answered, "Mike, if you're calling at this hour, it's something big," I replied, my own voice sounding unfamiliar, heavy, steady but sharp. "I need to see you. It's about the house, ownership, family." Daniel paused, then said, "I understand. When?" I answered, "Saturday morning." Daniel said, 9. My office is on Pearl Street. Mike, are you okay? I looked at the stack of documents on my desk, the evidence Claire never thought I would revisit, and said, "I'll be okay starting tomorrow morning." After hanging up, I stood, pulled open the drawer, took out a blank sheet of paper, and wrote in bold, uncompromising strokes, "This ends now." I set the paper on top of the file like a declaration. No more pity. No more blind kindness. No more letting anyone use my decency as chains. When I shut off the light, darkness filled the room, but for the first time in years, it didn't scare me. It felt like a doorway had opened, and I was finally choosing to step through. Saturday morning, I drove to Daniel Brooks's office on Pearl Street. Boulder was cold enough that my breath turned to mist in front of me, but my chest no longer shook. Strange, really. When a person hits their final limit, fear doesn't survive. It makes room for a kind of silence that's sharp, steady, and unfamiliar. Daniel worked on the second floor of a red brick building, the wide glass door reflecting my own determination at me. The letters, Brooks Real Estate Law, stood out, strict, cold, like the kind of emotionless justice I needed today. Daniel stood as soon as I walked in. His eyes moved across my face, recognizing I'd crossed a point I couldn't return from. "Mike, sit down. I'm guessing this isn't small." I placed the folder on his desk. The sound of it hitting the wood was dry and final, like an old door shutting for good. I need you to check everything. No omissions. Daniel opened his laptop and logged directly into Colorado's property database. He worked fast, silent, precise, like a heart surgeon whose every movement mattered. Then he turned the screen toward me. "Mike," Daniel said, each word clinking like metal striking metal, "the house at 1783 Maple Ridge Drive belongs entirely to you. 100%. No one else has any rights." I didn't react right away. The sentence didn't shock me. It simply confirmed what I'd vaguely sensed for 16 years, but never let myself face. "They," he continued, "are legally nothing more than tenants, temporary occupants. No lease, no contract, no taxes paid. They don't have any mechanism to claim ownership." Daniel clicked open another statute. "In Colorado, for residents without a lease, all you need is a 21-day notice to vacate. No reason required, no argument needed." I asked, "Could Claire sue?" Daniel gave a cold smile, the kind only a man who's seen too many files and too many lies can give. "Sue for what? For wanting to sell a house that isn't in their name? Or for the years they used your address to get tax breaks and school benefits? If that comes out, the IRS shows up fast. Trust me, they'll go quiet." I exhaled slowly, not lighter, just clearer. "I want to proceed. Today." Daniel looked at me differently then, not like a lawyer, like an old friend realizing how much of my life had been worn down. "Mike, this isn't just legal procedure." He leaned forward. "This is psychological warfare. Are you ready for how emotionally brutal this can get?" In my mind, I saw Claire standing in the living room, voice raised, eyes cold, in front of our whole family, and the neighbor who heard every word through the window. "The best thing you could give us is disappearing from our lives?" That sentence had been a block of ice lodged in my chest since that night. I lifted my head. "They fired the first shot. I'm just answering." Daniel stood and went to the printer. "All right, I'll draft the eviction notice. 21 days. If they don't leave, I'll file with the Boulder County Court immediately." The printer started up, steady, rhythmic, sounding like a slow courtroom gavel. He folded the paper, slid it into a thick brown envelope, and set it in front of me. "Mike," Daniel said, his voice dropping, "once you hand them this, the road behind you disappears. There won't be a way back." I set my palm on the envelope. The edge of the paper scraping my skin felt like the line between two halves of my life touching each other. "I'm not going back," I said. Daniel placed his hand gently on top of the envelope, like a final seal. "Then today is the day you take your life back." When I stepped out of the office, the Colorado sun washed over me, no longer harsh, more like the kind of light you see on the morning after a storm. Wind swept down from the Flatirons, icy but carrying with it, strangely, the feel of freedom. I set the envelope on the passenger seat of my car. Under the light, its brown gold color deepened, looking almost like a declaration already signed, a declaration of release. I came back home just as Mary's wall clock struck 3 in the afternoon. The Colorado winter light stretched through the living room window, long, cold, but no longer carrying the heaviness it used to. I stood in the stillness of the house, my hand still resting on the eviction notice envelope. Everything around me, the walls, the wooden floors, the smell of the house, suddenly carried a different meaning. This was no longer a burden. This was my asset. I stepped into my office and turned on the computer. The screen lit up, showing the balance of my retirement account at Vanguard. $220,184.17, the number I had built over nearly 3 decades. Not wealth, but enough to live quietly, and more importantly, enough to do what needed to be done. I opened the Wells Fargo mortgage page. Remaining balance, $61,200.44. I stared at that number for a long moment. 61,000. Bigger than a few nights' sleep. Smaller than an entire life of carrying someone else's debt. I took a breath, picked up my phone, and called Wells Fargo. Thank you for calling Wells Fargo Home Lending. Your estimated wait time is 42 minutes. The automated voice was flat, emotionless. I switched to speakerphone and set it on the desk. 42 minutes. I sat there, looking out the window at the snow-tipped flatirons. I thought about 16 years carrying this mortgage for someone else. I thought of Claire calling me past midnight, her voice shaking. Dad, I'm behind on the mortgage. Of Ethan saying, tips were slow this month. Of every time I pulled from my own pocket, not because I had extra, but because I didn't have the heart to let my daughter fail. 42 minutes passed like 4. Finally, a representative came on. Wells Fargo, this is Jenna speaking. How can I assist you today? I spoke slowly, clearly. I want to pay off the entire mortgage today. Jenna asked for verification. I read every detail like I was reciting my own biography. Once everything was confirmed, she repeated, You want to pay the full balance? Today? Yes, today. I transferred the money. Just a click. No chime, no confetti, no celebratory message. Just a small line on the screen. Processing. Then an email arrived in my inbox. Subject line, Mortgage paid in full. Title will be. Released in 72 hours. I read it 3 times. 3. Then let go of the mouse and leaned back in my chair. My chest tightened. Something rose inside me from a place I thought had turned to stone. For the first time in 10 years, I cried. Not sobbing. Not grief. The tears just fell, as if my body was finally allowed to exhale after decades of holding itself together. I wiped my face and suddenly laughed. A breathy, broken laugh pulled from deep in my chest. It's done, Mary, I whispered. It's finally done. I looked around the room, this little world where I'd shrunk myself every time Claire snapped at me, every time Ethan dodged responsibility, every time another bill landed in my hand that wasn't mine. All of that slid off me now like an old husk splitting open. I stood and walked to the kitchen. The house was empty, quiet. I remembered today was Black Friday. Claire had told the kids they were going big deal shopping. She always loved Black Friday, even when she never had money she spent as she did. Ethan loved pushing the cart, pretending he ran the world. And just like that, I knew they wouldn't be home for hours. What I needed most right now was time alone. I returned to my office, picked up the eviction notice envelope Daniel had given me. I stood in front of Mary's old clock, the dark wood face, the thin needle hands, every tick echoing like the heartbeat of the years we once lived together. I slid the envelope beneath that clock, the only place in this house I consider sacred. The desk lamp cast a glow that made the envelope look almost illuminated. I stood there for a long time, not to hesitate, but to burn this moment into memory. The moment I was no longer afraid of my own daughter, no longer afraid of being called names, no longer afraid of being seen as dead weight. The moment I became the owner of my own life again, not the man carrying the weight of someone else's mistakes. And as the clock's hand clicked into the next minute, I knew the real battle was about to begin. The next afternoon, Boulder was bright, but so cold it felt like a sheet of glass had been pulled over the sky. Yet inside my mind there was no trace of the old heaviness, only a kind of quiet, widening light, as if someone had finally opened a window in a sealed room. I stood at the corner of Pearl Street Mall, a place tied forever to Mary, her slow walks along the brick path, the latte in her hand, the smile in her eyes whenever she spotted a vintage shop. I'd rarely returned since she passed. Today I came back, not to mourn, but to begin something entirely new. The glass doors of Skyline Travel reflected my own shape back at me. A man once crushed beneath the weight of his family, now standing a little straighter, breathing a little deeper. I looked at myself for a second, long enough to know the change was real. I pushed the door open. The soft jingle of the bells sounded exactly like it had 20 years ago when Mary and I booked our Hawaii trip for our 10th anniversary. Behind the counter sat a young woman with her hair twisted into a messy bun, typing fast. She looked up and gave me a clear, bright smile. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you?" I don't know why that simple question softened something inside me. Maybe because it had been so long since anyone spoke to me without expectation, without demand, without blame. "I'm Mike," I said. "I want to book a trip. Far away. Somewhere with sun, ocean, and no one who knows my name." She laughed lightly. "Sounds like Maui." Maui. A simple name, but it hit me like a breath of clean air. Distant, unburdened, untouched by the things that had been choking me for years. "Maui," I said. 2 weeks. Julia, her name on her badge, typed with the quick precision of someone who enjoys her job. "There's a Denver direct flight to Kahului. Leaves tomorrow at 7:10 a.m. Lands early afternoon." "Book it," I said. "Round trip or one way?" The question froze me for half a heartbeat. I didn't know whether I'd come back. It all depended on what I found in those 2 weeks. "Round trip for now," I answered. 2 weeks. Julia nodded and asked about resorts. "Close to the ocean, quiet," I said. "Preferably without kids running around," she teased. I actually laughed, a sound I thought I'd forgotten. "No," I said. "I've heard enough children for one lifetime." She turned the monitor toward me. Waves, palm trees, a wooden walkway leading to pale sand. A violet sunset spreading across the water like velvet. My chest tightened in a way that wasn't pain, just yearning. Mary had wanted to go to Maui for our 20th anniversary. I turned her down because of a project I can't even remember now. "I'll take that room," I whispered, almost like a confession. Julia printed the tickets, tucked everything into a blue envelope, and handed me a small bottle of water. "Have a beautiful trip, Mike. You deserve a good break." Deserve. Such a small word, heavy enough to warm my chest. I didn't know whether I deserved anything, but for the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe I might. I stepped out of Skyline Travel with the envelope in hand. Winter wind rushed down the street, sharp and cold, but something inside me burned steady and warm, a spark I didn't know had survived. Back home, the harder part began, erasing every tether that kept me tied to them. I opened my laptop, logged into the bank. Claire still had an authorized user card I'd added back in 2016, a card she used for emergencies. For Claire, emergency meant a discounted outfit, a dinner out, anything she wanted in the moment. Her name sat on the screen like an old keychain I'd kept too long. I clicked remove. The system asked, "Are you sure?" For the first time in years, I wasn't hesitant. Confirm. Then I changed my email password, my bank login, my retirement account password, every password Claire had once helped me set up. I removed all unfamiliar devices, deleted the joint clinic account where I'd quietly covered hundreds of dollars of medical bills no one ever thanked me for. Each password felt like locking a door I should have closed a decade ago and throwing the key into a canyon. The house was silent, no kids' footsteps, no Ethan rambling about projects that never existed, no Claire criticizing every little thing I did wrong. I knew why. Black Friday. Claire chased Black Friday like an addict chases adrenaline. She could stand outside a store for hours to fight for something she didn't need. It accidentally gave me something priceless. Time alone. I pulled my suitcase from the closet. The wheels rolling across the wood floor sounded strangely light. Free. I packed a few clothes, essentials, sunscreen, and a small photo album of Mary, the only piece of the old life I wanted to take. I didn't need much. A new life doesn't require many things to begin. I zipped the suitcase shut. The click of the latch sounded like a line being drawn. Mary's wall clock struck 8, its ticking steady, like the heartbeat of someone who had finally survived the worst of it. The desk lamp shone over the eviction notice envelope and my plane ticket. They lay side by side like twin halves of a single truth, one to end a life, one to start another. I picked up my phone, opened the clock app. and set the alarm for 4:30 a.m. The small line of text under the alarm made me stop for a long, still moment. Tomorrow, I disappear. And for the first time in many years, I believed it. The alarm at 4:30 a.m. rang through the thick darkness of a house that had memorized my breathing for 16 years. The sound wasn't loud, but it sliced through the silence like a clean blade, signaling what I'd been preparing for. Leaving. I sat up, cold, steady, without hesitation. My feet touched the wooden floor, the same boards that had carried thousands of anxious steps over the years. But this morning, every step felt strangely light, as if the house itself were stepping aside for a man finally escaping his old shadow. I pulled my suitcase out of the room, the wheels whispering across the stairs like the soft breath of freedom. Halfway down, I stopped, not out of regret, but because there was one thing I needed to see one last time. The family photo on the wall, Mary in the center, one hand on my shoulder, Claire smiling faintly, still the child who didn't yet know bitterness, Lily holding her stuffed bear, Noah in Ethan's arms, red-faced and peaceful. Mary's eyes in that photo were exactly the same as the day she left, gentle, deep, strong enough to freeze me in place. I touched the dark wooden frame. "I'm going now, Mary," I whispered, not to the woman I lost, but to the life I was finally shedding. I walked down the last steps and opened the front door. The dawn wind was so cold it felt sharp enough to tear skin, yet it tasted cleaner than any breath I'd taken in that house. The streetlight cast a dull gold across the driveway, and the Uber I'd called was already waiting, blinkers flashing. I set my suitcase in the trunk, slid into the back seat, and looked at Maple Ridge Drive one final time through the window. No feeling of being left behind, no grief, just clarity. I'd lived there as a shadow too long. Now it was just an address. The Uber rolled past the streets I once knew by heart, but Boulder looked different this morning, like a city I was only visiting, not a place I belonged to. Stores, houses, familiar corners drifted past like scenes from a film I'd watched too many times to ever want to rewatch. At Denver International, the sky was shifting from black to violet. I passed security, past long rows of seats, and reached the gate for the 7:10 flight to Maui. When I sat by the window, my phone began to vibrate. One call, then another, the name on the screen. Claire. I thought about ignoring it, but it rang again, and again, and again, like she was clinging to something she once said she wanted gone. Texts flashed across the screen, each one hitting like a fist. "Dad, what is this eviction notice? What is this? Call me now." I answered one call, just one. I needed to end things with clarity, not silence. Claire's scream burst out the second I lifted the phone. "Dad, what the hell are you doing? Eviction notice? Are you insane? You can't kick us out like this." Her voice was full of panic. Strange, very strange. She'd never panicked when hurting me, only when her comfort was threatened. I stared at the window shade, my voice calm, almost cold. "You're asking the wrong question, Claire. Why are you doing this? You can't—" "Not why I did it," I cut in. "Why you thought I'd tolerate one more second of this." She paused, then shouted louder. "You can't kick us out." I spoke slowly, each word clear as the tick of a second hand on a clock. "You wanted me gone from your life, Claire." I let one beat of silence fall, enough for the truth to land. "Well, now you get what you asked for." On the other end, I heard her breath hitch. Real panic, not the performative kind. "Dad, don't do this. This isn't what I meant. Listen to me." I ended everything with 3 words. Wish granted. Then I pressed end call. The phone lit up again, vibrating nonstop with calls and messages. I removed the case, slid out the SIM card, and snapped it in half with a simple final pressure. When it broke between my fingers, a piece of the old life broke with it. The plane began to taxi. The engines hummed, steady and strong, just like my heartbeat, no longer pounding with fear, but with release. When the wheels lifted off the ground, Denver shrank beneath me, the neighborhoods and roads fading into pale shapes before being swallowed by clouds. I leaned back in my seat, took a long, full breath. For the first time in many years, I exhaled like a free man. Denver disappeared under the clouds, and I stepped into a new life. Maui hit me like the first breath after being underwater too long. The warm, rounded sunlight settled on my skin, not the dry, biting kind from Colorado, but a gentler, forgiving light that opened my lungs, as if I'd finally escaped a sealed room I'd lived in for 2 decades. On the first morning, I stood on soft sand, learning to paddleboard. The ocean was calm like a sheet of blue glass, yet when I stepped onto the board, my body tightened, the way a man tightens after a lifetime of bracing. The old Hawaiian instructor looked at me with deep brown eyes, kind the way volcanic earth is kind. Don't fight the water. Let it carry you. A simple line, but it struck exactly where I'd been stuck. I realized that for years I'd been fighting everything. Fighting ingratitude, fighting dependence, fighting the feeling that I had to hold everyone's world together. But water isn't meant to be fought. It just needs to be followed. By day 4, I climbed Haleakala. The road twisted toward the summit, wind whipping hard enough to knock a grown man down. Yet strangely, I wasn't tired. The higher I went, the lighter I felt, as if each step peeled off a layer of the life that had pressed me into the ground. When the sun rose over the volcano's rim, thin fog burned away, spilling red gold light like someone was pouring life back onto the earth. They call this place where the day begins, and standing there, I felt reborn in the most literal way. One afternoon, I stopped at a cafe near Lahaina. I ended up sitting with a group of retired Californians, people weathered by sun, by life, and by their own wounds. They invited me over like we'd known each other for years. When they asked why I came to Maui, I simply said, "To breathe." Susan, a silver-haired woman with soft curls, looked at me with eyes that had seen too much to be fooled. "Children don't get to define our worth," another man added. "Toxic is toxic, even when it shares your last name." I didn't respond, but the words slid into my chest and stayed there, the way sea salt clings to fabric, undeniable, unshakable. 2 weeks in Maui passed with wind and waves, while Claire's emails hit like out-of-season storms, dozens a day, voicemails full of sobbing, then rage, then begging, then blaming, an emotional cyclone that no longer tore me apart. I stood outside of it now, watching a storm that had lost its power over me. On the 6th day, Ethan sent a threat. "If you think you can evict us, we will sue you for harassment." Daniel replied for me with an email containing just 2 words: "Good luck." Ethan went silent immediately. On the 11th night, I sat on the lani, listening to waves crash in a steady rhythm, like a heart that had finally been repaired. I'd brought a small notebook with me, always afraid to write in it. This time my hand didn't shake. I wrote 4 things, short, but strong as new pillars in my life. Sell the Maple Ridge house. Buy a small cabin in Estes Park or Salida, small enough no one can leech off me again. Spend 1 month every winter in Hawaii, not to hide, but to live. And finally, no more ties to people who use blood as chains. When I set the pen down, my body felt weightless, as if I had unbuckled armor I'd worn far too many years. The 2 weeks flew faster than I expected. My skin darkened, my breath deepened, my mind widened like the ocean on a quiet morning. On the last night, I walked down to the beach. The Maui moon was so bright, the water looked silver-plated. The wind carried the scent of salt into my lungs, not to burn, but to heal. I stood there, facing the distant version of myself, a man drained, defined by everyone else's demands. I closed my eyes and spoke aloud, slow and final, like a vow to freedom. I'm not going back to the man I was, and I knew I wasn't saying it just to say it. I said it because for the first time in my life, I believed myself. When I landed in Denver after 2 weeks in Maui, the Colorado wind slapped my face with that familiar dry sting. But this time, it didn't cut through me the way it used to. I'd brought back a new kind of armor, not steel, but clarity. The Uber took me from the airport to Maple Ridge Drive. The familiar street sat under a blue-gray afternoon sky. But my house, the driveway was empty. No Claire's car, no Ethan's, no arguing behind the walls, no chaos. Only silence. A strange kind of silence. When I stepped through the front door, the first thing that hit me wasn't the smell of old food or a TV left on the wrong channel. It was a bone-deep emptiness. The house was clean in a way that wasn't normal. Not clean like someone had tidied up. Clean like no one had ever lived here. The sofa was bare. No Claire blanket, no clutter. The kitchen counters were empty. The dining table had no kids' worksheets scattered across it. The whole place felt like a staged home in a brochure, not a place where anyone actually breathed. I walked slowly. Each step echoed off the walls like footsteps inside an abandoned building. They hadn't just moved out. They'd erased themselves, on purpose, as if to leave behind a blank space meant to say, I no longer belonged in this family picture. In the kitchen, right in the center of the wooden table, sat a single piece of paper. Neat, waiting, only a few words written in Claire's familiar blue ink. You chose money over family. We're gone. I picked it up. The paper trembled slightly under my fingers, but my hand didn't. 2 weeks ago, this note might have shattered me. I once believed family was a one-way street, that if I just gave enough, endured enough, sacrificed enough, they'd finally see me. But they never saw me. They only took. And the moment I stopped giving, they vanished. I let out a laugh, a low, real laugh, light as breath. No, I said out loud, letting the empty kitchen hear it. I chose myself over being used. The words echoed off the bare walls like a legal declaration. For the first time in my life, I chose me. Not the fixer, not the emotional punching bag, not the wallet walking between their arguments and failures. Me. Just me. I took out my phone and called Daniel. He answered after 2 rings. Mike, you're back? I need to move to the next step, I said. They're gone, all 3. No apology, no decency. Just a note on the kitchen table. I figured, Daniel replied. You want to start the listing process? Yes. I looked around the kitchen, the same kitchen I remodeled for Claire back in 2018. The kitchen she once called cheap-looking, after I spent nearly $19,000 on upgrades. Standing here now, it felt like an empty stage after actors storm off mid-scene. As soon as possible, I said. Daniel exhaled, not out of sadness, but out of recognition. I'll send the listing contract tonight. And Mike, I'm really glad for you. I hung up and stood in the quiet house. No Claire snapping about something trivial. No Ethan rummaging in the fridge for food he didn't buy. No kids fighting. No arguments spilling through the hall like poison gas. Just silence. A silence I'd forgotten I ever deserved. I went upstairs, grabbed the old phone I'd shut off before flying to Maui, and powered it on. It lit up instantly. Dozens of messages. Long emails full of blame. Voicemails Claire had left every day as if she were performing for the absence she created. I scrolled through them. Not a single emotion pulled me down. Nothing in that phone had the right to hurt me anymore. I opened the contacts. Claire. I hit block. A question popped up. Are you sure? For the first time in my life, I was. Confirm. Then I did the same to Ethan. 1 tap. Block. 2 names that once took up far too much space in my life disappeared from my list like 2 shadows, erased from a doorway. I set the phone down, simple, light, not painful. Freedom doesn't always come with an explosion. Sometimes it's just a decision. I looked out the window. Late afternoon Boulder sky, silver and soft, somehow looked more beautiful than it ever had. Maybe the sky hadn't changed. Maybe it was just the first time I was seeing it with different eyes. The storm was over, and in the end, the one still standing, was me. 3 weeks after I returned to Boulder, my life felt steadier than I expected. Quiet mornings, hot coffee, birds on the back fence, luxuries I'd never realized I deserved. The emptiness of the house didn't make me sad anymore. It made me light. Still, I knew a wave of consequences was unfolding somewhere out of sight. And on a Thursday afternoon, Daniel called. "Mike," he said as soon as I picked up, "there are a few things you should know." I leaned against the kitchen counter, ready. "The IRS reopened 2 years of Claire's tax returns," Daniel said, "for filing the wrong residence address, plus using your home address to claim tax credits she didn't qualify for." I closed my eyes, not out of pain, but because truth was finally doing what it always does, circling back to collect its debt. Daniel continued, "They're being charged back. It's not a small amount. And because Ethan filed jointly, they're both responsible." I remembered the times I signed to protect them, thinking a father's role was to shield. Now the shield was gone, and the law was doing its job. No anger, no satisfaction, just right. "And this," Daniel added, his voice dropping, "Ethan was officially sued by his former restaurant for unpaid equipment contracts. Only a few thousand, but he doesn't stand a chance." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Ethan had never taken responsibility for anything he signed. This was inevitable. "So where are they now?" I asked. Daniel exhaled. "They moved out of the temporary place earlier this week. Now they're renting a smaller, cheaper apartment near Highway 36, because they can't afford better. Constant traffic noise, old building, under renovations, so the only reason they got it is the low price." A picture flashed in my mind. Claire, the same person who once said, "Dad, your house isn't even nice," now living where the sound of buses at night is closer than the sound of her husband's voice. Not because of anything I'd done, but because they'd spent years believing I would always stand between them and their consequences. For the first time in my life, I wasn't standing there anymore. Daniel asked, "You okay?" I answered softly, "I'm okay. They built their life. Now they live it." He paused, then said, "You did the right thing." After the call, I sat at the kitchen table. Afternoon light filtered through the window, warming the old wooden surface. Here everything was calm now, but that same day I received a very different email. From Lily Harlow, my granddaughter. Subject, Grandpa. I opened it. Only a few lines, but heavier and truer than anything Claire had ever said. "Grandpa, I miss you. Mom lied about many things. I know now. I'm sorry. I just want to see you." I set my hand on the table and lost my breath for a moment. Lily, the child I used to drive to school every morning, buy pancakes for when she got a bad grade, hug when her mother yelled too loudly, now had to write this in secret, in a rental apartment off the highway, where she had nothing left except the truth. I replied, not rushing, not shaking. "Grandpa is here when you're ready. Not sooner, not later, when you choose." I wanted her to know the door was open for her, but no. One would drag me back into the old cycle again. I wasn't returning to be the buffer for her mother's toxicity, but I was still her grandfather. That never changed. That evening I received the contract from Daniel. Listing agreement, 1783 Maple Ridge Drive. I sat at the table that had seen hundreds of tense meals. Claire's cold tone, Ethan's complaints, the kids' arguments, and me trying to keep everything from breaking. A house is never the cause of a tragedy, but sometimes it's the stage for one, and it was time to clear the stage. I signed, Michael Andrew Harlow. My handwriting steady, no tremor, no guilt, no leftover foolish hope that Claire might someday be grateful. When the ink dried, I put the pen down and exhaled. A long breath, the kind that makes you realize you just closed a door that weighed a ton. The house would go. The past would go. And I was still standing, like someone who survived a storm he didn't know he'd lived inside for years. I placed the signed contract on the table beside the old phone, then opened my contacts and blocked Claire and Ethan both. This time, not as punishment, but to protect the new life I'd finally stepped into. One early fall morning, I received an email from Daniel with a short subject line, "Closing complete." I opened it, and the first sentence felt like the solid heartbeat of a new life. Final sale price, $640,000. I read that number 3 times, not because I was surprised, but because it meant more than money. It was the ending period to 16 years, locked inside a cycle of hope, burden, and disappointment. A week later, I signed the documents to receive the wire transfer and used part of it to buy a small cabin in Estes Park. Right at the edge of the woods, pine walls, a balcony looking straight at the Rocky Mountains. Small, but to me it was as wide as the world. No one living off me, no one pounding on my door, no one treating me like a backup plan for their mistakes. I remember the day I held the cabin keys, a small light key that somehow felt like I was holding the whole sky. I opened the door for the first time, the smell of fresh wood lingering, sunlight cutting through the window and landing on the table I wiped down myself. I stood in the middle of that empty room and breathed, one long, full, light breath. After the cabin was ready, I boarded a winter flight back to Maui, just like the promise I'd written in the notebook on the lanai. This time, I didn't go to escape. I went to live. I stayed at the same resort but chose a different room, one facing the stretch of sand where every afternoon the waves rolled in like the heartbeat of someone waking up after a long sleep. I grew familiar with the temporary neighbors, an elderly couple from Oregon, a 55-year-old woman who quit her job after 30 years, a retired sailor writing his memoir. Nobody demanded anything. They just talked, laughed, lived. They called me Colorado Mike, and I smiled every time I heard it. In Maui, I had a life without required schedules, without slammed doors, without anyone telling me I was a burden. I drank coffee by the beach, paddleboarded before sunrise, read under palm shade, and sometimes just lay there listening to the ocean. I realized I had lived my entire life playing the role of the one who holds everything up, so much that I forgot what it felt like to live for myself. Claire was no longer the shadow, looming over every decision I made. I wasn't afraid of her, not afraid of her anger, her accusations, or being labeled a bad father. Inside me, that fear had shut off like a lamp pulled from the wall. One light wind afternoon, I sat on the lanai, opened my laptop, and wrote the final email I would ever send to Claire. Not long, not bitter, just truth that had fully ripened. Claire, I forgive you, but I won't live under your shadow anymore. I read it once, slowly, then hit send. No expectations, no trembling. Forgiveness wasn't for her, it was for me, to free myself from the cage I had built out of my own unreturned kindness. The next day I walked down to the beach. The Maui sky was so blue it felt like someone washed the heavens with seawater. I stepped onto the sand, let the clear water touch my ankles, the waves warm, gentle, then pulling away, soft like Mary's hand on my back in our younger years. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the wind run through my hair, letting the salt sink into my skin, letting my heart understand the simplest truth. I was still alive, and I was free. I opened my eyes. The beach stretched wide. A new wave was rolling in, and the new version of me was rolling in with it, no longer tangled, no longer begging to be seen, no longer believing family is an unbreakable rope, even when it's strangling you. Just me, 62, standing under the sun, stepping into a life I never thought I could reach. I smiled. The smile Mary once said was the real Mike. Then I stepped closer into the clear water, standing on that Maui beach on my final morning, the warm waves brushing my ankles, the salty wind blowing straight into my face. I understood something it took 62 years and a long detour of pain to reach. Freedom isn't leaving others. Freedom is returning to yourself. I had lived too long believing sacrifice was mandatory, that love meant enduring, that family was something to keep at any cost, even when they were using that bond to wear me down day after day. And then, at the age most people think is only made for regret, I watched myself walk out of a house that swallowed my breath, step out from the shadow of a daughter I had spoiled, to the point of losing myself, and finally stand where the sun rose without being afraid of its light touching the wounds I had hidden. I didn't lose anything, I simply returned what was never mine to carry. Selling 1783 Maple Ridge wasn't a loss. It was a burial for a life that had been used the wrong way. And the cabin in Estes Park wasn't an escape. It was the place where my breathing finally belonged to me. When I wrote, "I forgive you, but I won't live under your shadow anymore," I didn't write it for Claire to understand. I wrote it so I could finish the story. Now, watching the waves pull back and return again, I see something clearly. I'm returning too. Returning to the version of myself before responsibility and ingratitude eroded me. I am Mike, 62, and I finally became the man I was meant to be. If you've ever been like me, silent to keep the peace, carrying weight so others wouldn't collapse, sacrificing so long you forgot who you were, then I want to tell you something simple and true. You deserve a chapter without chains. If my story touched you, share it with someone standing exactly where you used to stand. Follow for more journeys like this. Stories without sugarcoating, without softened edges, just truth and liberation. And if today you must choose between kindness being exploited and protecting yourself, then listen to a 62-year-old man who just walked out of the dark. Don't wait for someone to pull you out. You must step out yourself, and you deserve to.